Okay, so hi and welcome to the information session we've organised for the Manning River Estuary and Catchment Management Program. We've got a mix of people here from community and fellow council staff, so thanks for joining us. Look, we've done a lot of consultation along the journey of developing this catchment and estuary management program, but really this is just the beginning of the future of the Manning River. And we look forward to working with everyone to safeguard our amazing river system. I'm going to introduce you to my coordinator, Louise Duff, so catchment coordinator here, and she's going to present a presentation to you about the program.
Thanks, Alicia. Hopefully you can see the slideshow now. So this is we've just launched the exhibition for the Manning River Estuary and Catchment Management Program. We call it ECMP for short, because it's a bit of a mouthful. And this is what we're trying to do with the plan. We're trying to safeguard this beautiful Manning River that we all love. We love the clean water and the beautiful riparian vegetation that helps keep the river clean. People love to fish in our river and swim in our river, especially on a hot day. It's a place where wildlife lives. We've got the Manning River helmeted turtle found only in the Manning. We've got platypus and spiny crayfish and bass and all sorts of fantastic aquatic wildlife that live in the river. And it's a cultural place as well, where generations have been connected to the river, both our Biripi community, the Warramai upriver, as well as white settlers who use the river and have for generations. But when we did our rapid assessment of the river back in 2019, as we sort of kicked off the planning process, we found many issues and problems in the system. We've got a lot of cleared land for agriculture, and a lot of those soils are really compacted. So what you get then is really rapid runoff during rain events and poor infiltration into the soil, and that carries nutrients into the river. We've got cattle readily accessing the banks in a lot of places. You can see at the top right there an acid event. We had an acid event last February after the drought, where we have the acid sulfate soils leaching acid into the main stem of the Manning, and you can see that there. And from that we get red spot disease in fish and fish kills. And we've got a lot of weed problems, especially after the fire. And we have a lot of erosion as well, and a lot of that stems from agricultural practices. And you can see the algae in the bottom left. So where we get nutrients like fertilisers and manures washing into the river, we get algae blooms and a whole lot of problems that stem from them. So these are some of the pressures the river's facing, and we wanted to take a whole of catchment approach to manage these issues. It's a little bit confusing, but the plan has been developed under the Coastal Management Framework and particularly under the Coastal Management Act. So just to give you a brief rundown on that, there was a coastal reform done by the New South Wales government in 2016. And you can see at the top the three acts that this relates to. So the Coastal Management Act came in, and it has a whole lot of objects around protecting the coast, especially coastal wetlands and littoral rainforest, and managing development. But it also has one of its objects to implement the Marine Estate Management Act, which deals with the marine estate, and that includes the estuary. So that's why we're doing this catchment management program under the Coastal Management Act, and it will allow us to access coast and estuary grant funding, which will be at a rate of 2 to 1. So I'll just leave that there, but if you've ever got any questions about the Coastal Management Act, feel free to ask. So as I said, through the Coastal Management Act, we're covering the estuary, and you can see the estuary there in the darker green at the bottom right of that image. The estuary goes right up past Wingham and up to Upper Lansdowne, anywhere that's tidal in the system. And we're also taking a whole of catchment approach. So that was a really strong message from our community reference group. So we're not just looking at the estuary, because the whole system's connected from the fresh water to the salt. And we know that what happens in the upper catchment impacts on the estuary. So while we've got a strong focus on the estuary, because it is under the Coastal Management Act, we do have a program that addresses issues right throughout our whole catchment. It's a massive catchment, 8,500 square kilometres. So the vision of the Estuary and Catchment Management Program is that the Manning River, its tributaries and the estuary give life to our community, connecting the mountains to the sea. Together, we manage the catchment holistically and respond to a changing climate, safeguarding environmental, social, cultural and economic values. The program's organised into these 8 themes, and each of these themes has its own objective. So I'm not going to go into the detail of those objectives today, but you can find them in the program online. So number 1 is stewardship, because all of these problems are people problems. If there weren't people here, if you went back to pre-settlement, you would have found a beautifully healthy system. So working with our community is number 1. Water quality and ecosystem health is our second theme and objective. Addressing climate change risk is number 3. And then biodiversity, looking after our wildlife, Aboriginal custodianship, looking after social and economic values, land use planning and governance. So in each of these themes, we've got an objective, as I said, and a range of actions. I've already talked about some of the key issues that we're facing in the catchment. We did a risk assessment at the beginning of the planning process, and you can find out more about that in the document, how we did that risk assessment. And some of the key issues that were raised were community stewardship, as I've said, loss of coastal wetlands on the floodplain. The coastal wetlands are really the kidneys of the landscape, and they're so important for filtering out pollutants like nutrients and sediments before they reach the river and the estuary. There's been a lot of floodplain drainage. About 200 kilometres of channels were built back in around the 1930s, and they then expose acid sulphate soils. So when those soils dry, they get exposed to oxygen, and then when they get re-wetted, the acid comes out into the system. Agricultural impacts are one of our key threats in both the estuary and the whole catchment. It is a rural area with, you know, a fantastic history of farming, and we need food production, we need food security, and our farmers are a really important part of the cultural life of our community. But we need to find ways to manage agriculture better. And loss and degradation of riparian vegetation. So as I've mentioned, that riverbank vegetation or riparian vegetation is what really holds the banks together. It provides incredible habitat for wildlife, and particularly with climate change, it allows for wildlife movements up from the coast up to the mountains. It also provides habitat for aquatic species because it's dropping in food and providing shelter. And it's stopping, again, nutrients and sediments from reaching the river. So there are our top issues. Just to run through some of the other issues addressed, climate change, particularly 50 to 100 years, is where our modelling shows we're going to start really feeling the impacts of that. Modified flow is something that was a huge concern, you know, of course, during the drought, which was right when we were doing our risk assessment. Pathogens from sewage and septic is a concern for things like swimming and also drinking water. It increases treatment costs. And of course, for our oyster industry, which really needs that clean water. At the moment, we can't direct harvest from the Manning. Urban stormwater, litter and marine debris. So this is coming from our major centres like Gloucester, Wingham and Taree. Wildlife conservation. Entrance modifications, you might be aware of a sort of community and ministerial-led push to modify the entrance, and that will have a range of knock-on effects into the estuary. Modified hydrology and fish passage. So we've got a lot of barriers to fish passage in the system, erosion and sediment control, and flooding and inundation. So I'm just going to give an overview of the actions. We've actually got 36 actions. And when you look at the document, you might think those actions are quite sort of high level. We do also have practice notes. So if you're really interested to get into the nitty-gritty of the actions, if you go to Annexure J, which is the practice notes, you'll see more detail around what that action is all about. So in In terms of promoting community stewardship, we'll be partnering with community groups, particularly with Landcare, groups like the Manning Turtle Conservation Group, and with Hunter Local Land Services, our partner. And we'll be developing a whole range of education programs, thinking about building understanding, commitment and those positive values, and giving people the skills they need to use the river responsibly. We'll be restoring coastal wetlands. So those coastal wetlands are listed under the State Environmental Planning Policy for the Coastal Management Act. And some of them are on acid soils and high priority acid soils, some of them aren't. So we'll be addressing coastal wetland restoration across the board. We'll be addressing floodplain drainage and remediating acid sulfate soils. Council has a long history of doing this, particularly with Big Swamp and Cat-Eye wetlands. And we have another big project in the works to do more of that. We'll be working with landholders in partnership to restore riparian vegetation. And it's not just about restoring it, it's also about looking at, can we create riparian reserves? Are there areas of public land that we could use as, best practice for riparian restoration? And finally, promoting sustainable agriculture. And within our reference group, there was a really strong kind of interest in regenerative farming and a lot of interest in that in our community. It's about restoring soil organics, soil carbon, pasture cover, and that gives us a win because it stops that diffuse runoff that takes the farmer's fertiliser that he's spent money on straight down into the river during a rain event. The plan does include a business plan. So under the Coastal Management Act, we have to put in a 10-year business plan. So it does have budget against it. And we do have firm commitments from council and some of the other lead agencies for that expenditure. So it's not just a plan that's going to sit on a shelf. In fact, we have a legislative responsibility to implement this plan. And we'll be, as Alicia said, kicking that off as soon as it's adopted. We're starting to get ready for that now. And we really look forward to working a lot more with the community in that implementation phase in a really, ongoing and meaningful way. We have council funds allocated to the plan. So that comes from the environmental rate and the stormwater charge. And we also have identified cost sharing. So Hunter Local Land Services is a great partner. We have a memorandum of understanding in place with them, and they're putting in a significant amount of funds into this program, some of it coming through the Marine Estate Management Strategy. And as I said, we'll be applying for 2-for-1 funding through the Coast and Estuary program run by the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. So altogether, we're aiming for every dollar council spent, we'll be getting $3 from our other partners. Just a bit about consultation. So we have consulted with a range of stakeholders right through the process. In the beginning, we did some public events. We had about 250 people involved in workshops and pop-up surveys and roaming surveys and online surveys around values. We had a big risk assessment process, and we talked with farmers and council stakeholders and our reference group. We've also consulted with the Biripi community and with community interest groups. So right through the whole process, we've done consultation, but throughout the exhibition, we're really looking to talk with some more groups and also hoping to receive submissions. So what's our community telling us? The top 3 values through our quantitative survey were aquatic ecosystem health, visual amenity, and cultural and spiritual value of the river. And people understood that all the other values stem from having a healthy ecosystem, whether that's economic values, recreation, tourism, and so on. So yeah, there was a really clear understanding of that in the community. Some of the people told us they love the wildlife, the birds, the fish, the dolphins. People get blown away seeing dolphins right up at Taree. And someone also said, there's a deep sense of history, childhood days, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who farmed this land, lived, worked, and relaxed along the river. So there's a really strong connection to the river. We engaged an agricultural consultant, and he interviewed 24 farmers in depth and we asked the farmers about the barriers that they find to taking up good environmental practice, and also what are their drivers and motivators. And what we heard from that consultation is that farmers are willing to improve their environmental practices, but they want it to have a whole farm planning benefit and to have benefits to their productivity and farm management. We engaged Jodie Laura at the left there to consult with the Biripi community, and their concerns were very much the same as the wider community. They're concerned about ecosystem health, about acid events and pollution. They're concerned about flow and maintaining natural flow rates, and they're concerned about access and recreational access. We had a fantastic reference group, so you can just see a few of them here. We had 4 farmers on that group, Peter Longworth in the front. We had dairy and beef farmers. We had an oyster farmer, Ian Crisp. And we had community representatives. You can see Tony Wales there, who's in a Coast Care group. So we had a really good mix of people. And you can see Ian Crisp, one thing he said was, you know, people will move here and invest here if they know we're committed to looking after the river. And we also did a lot of stakeholder consultations. So that included a technical advisory group of experts. There's a lot of council teams involved. This isn't about silos. It's not just natural systems. We're running this across council. We did consultation with our partner agencies, and we also had a lot of peer review processes in place. We've also started consulting with community interest groups, and we're looking forward to doing more of that over the coming weeks. So we've talked with Women in Dairy, and we'll be seeing them again soon. The Manning River Turtle Conservation Group hosted us to run a little workshop with them. I'll be meeting with New South Wales Farmers Association today, and we're going to see Gloucester Environment Group, Mid Coast to Tops Landcare and Ozfish in the coming couple of weeks. So if there's anyone here from those groups, thanks so much for your interest, and we're really looking forward to hearing more about what you have to say. Look, I might just mention, and just before we close, that this plan doesn't go right down to the entrance. I'm meant to say it only covers from 2 kilometres inland and up. So we've got another plan we're developing, which will be the Old Bar Manning Point Coastal Management Program. The reason we've split that off and doing the separate one is because Old Bar and Manning Point are listed as erosion hotspots by the state government, and they have a lot different processes happening there with coastal inundation and erosion. So yeah, we felt like we needed a special plan just to deal with those issues. So this plan is more, yeah, from 2 kilometres inland and all the way up. So get involved. Thank you so much for coming to the webinar. As Alicia said, this is really just the beginning. So there's ways to have your say. You can firstly make a submission. I'm going to be cheeky and say, you know, sometimes we get the submissions that are people, firstly with good suggestions, and that's something we really want. Any sort of input that you've got, knowledge gaps that you can see in the plan, very happy to hear that, and we'll look at addressing all of those concerns and reporting back. But sometimes we tend to get more critical submissions, and it's really important that if you do support having a whole of catchment program in place for the Manning, that you let us know that too, because when we're taking it through council, that's what it will help us get it adopted and get those council investment. You can come and chat with us. We're running drop-ins in Taree, Wingham and Gloucester, and those dates and times are on our website. And also on that webpage, you can subscribe to our Manning River newsletter, and that's where you'll find out about projects as they start to roll out. So yeah, we encourage you to get involved and participate in projects as they start to be developed, and we'll be consulting more just on the projects as we're planning them out. So this is our web page. It's council's website / Our Manning River.